Washington Journal continues.
Our first guest of the morning, Representative Rich McCormick, Republican of Georgia. He serves the 6th District, also a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committee, joining us on Washington Journal. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Oh, well, thanks for coming by. Later on today, the House will decide on a short-term funding package. What do you think of that approach?
I think it's the only thing left on the table. I've heard rumors that there's going to be some other things included that for voter security, but I think when you talk about what people are going to agree to, something that's going to get us a short-term deal, not going to affect the military budgeting process, which if you extend it through March would, but something that people are willing to accept through the lame duck portion until we can get to the new Congress and the new Senate and hopefully the new president. And
so as far as the short-term, you're okay with that? You'll vote for it?
I probably won't, actually. Okay. I'm very upset with the whole process. It's going to pass. We don't want to shut down the government. I totally understand why Mike Johnson is doing it. I understand leadership's opinion on this. I'm trying to be respectful of everybody involved in this process. But from the very beginning, I've been a hard no on CRs that were clean. I think this just continues the habit of passing these omnibus bills without any accountability, not doing the right process. The first thing I asked Kevin McCarthy when I came into Congress was, are we going to get a budget done the right way for the first time in decades? He said, yes, we are. And he tried, to his credit. And I think we had the limit, save, grow, which we could have passed. I think some people wish they had their vote back now, who are swinging for the fences, think they're going to get everything they can in a narrow majority. Unfortunately, people who go for everything usually get nothing, and that's the problem.
Was the problem of that also the inclusion of what was known as the SAVE Act in the initial CR, do you think?
Well, we knew that that wasn't going to pass. We had a good vote count, but part of that's how we also budgeted that CR. I mean, we did a 6-month instead of a 3-month. Question is, would it have passed if it was a 3-month CR with the SAVE Act attached to it? I don't know. I'm not the whip, and I didn't do the count on that, but it'll be interesting. I know people who've been around for a lot longer than I have are trying to do the right thing. That's why I'm never critical of leadership, because I know that's almost an impossible job with a now 3-vote majority, and without having the Senate or the presidency, it makes things very tough.
I don't want to get lost in acronyms. Explain what the SAVE Act is, and is that something you would have supported?
Of course, and I did support it. It's the only reason I voted for this CR, even knowing that it probably wasn't going to pass, and especially since it would have affected the military budgeting system in a negative way. And anybody who doesn't understand that once you go past January, the way that we do our military budgeting, we purchase things, would have been severely inhibited by going through March without a ability for the military to budget separately.
And you talked about the short term. What happens at the end of the year? We heard Speaker Johnson say that he didn't want to see another bus or an omnibus or a minibus happen. But what's the likelihood that we come to the end of the year and there's some resolve or no resolve to the funding issue?
Well, let's be realistic. When's the last time we passed the budget the right way? We have so much work to be done. I know that can be done, but unlikely we're going to have a supermajority. Even if we pick up some seats in the Congress, which I hope we do, even if we pick up the Senate, which I think we will, even if we get the presidency, which I also hope we do, I think we still have a lot to do, because even when we had control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency, we still didn't do the budgeting process right. We didn't balance the budget. We didn't reduce the deficit. We have a lot of work to be done, and we're going to have a lot of disagreeing between us, because some people just want to get things done. Other people want to be very, very responsible.
I know that you said you wanted to respect leadership, but in the eyes of Republicans, how does Speaker Johnson stand today because of these efforts?
I think everybody understands he's a humble guy. He's an honest guy. He's a conservative. Also, what he's dealing with, once again, 3-vote majority. That means anybody falls out of line, he loses that vote. So he's trying to get all people to the table. I think, once again, herding cats is probably even lost on me. I think now it's herding snakes. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do. And that's why my hat's off to them, all the efforts they have to put in. People, you make one person happy, you make another person unhappy. And then you try to make that person happy and then make the other person unhappy. And it's just the way of things, and it's the way our country's always been run. Everybody gets frustrated with the lack of progress. Everybody gets frustrated because it's an almost impossible thing to do, but it's designed that way on purpose. People forget that the Constitution was designed in order to make the government very inefficient. They wanted a government that couldn't become too powerful so that the people would be overwhelmed by the government. As a matter of fact, it's the one government like that that has this incredible balance. And if you think about it, the most efficient governments, a monarchy or a dictatorship, are the worst governments. And as many people have said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others.
Rich McCormick with us, Representative, Republican of Georgia. And if you want to ask him questions about the issues that we talked about and other things, 202-748-8255. 8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and Independents, 202-748-8002. You serve on foreign affairs. There are reports that Ukrainian President Zelensky's set to talk with American leaders about how he wants to use long-range missiles into Russia. Can you talk about your perspective on what he's asking for and if that's a reasonable ask?
So one of the things that has been very, very frustrating to me as a military guy, 20 years in the military, 16 years in the Marine Corps. I was a pilot, did some airborne time, cross-deck with the Army, and then served as a ER doctor in Afghanistan, as the head of emergency medicine in Kandahar in 2016, teaching amphibious warfare, teaching evolutionary warfare. One of the things that drives me crazy is when you put handcuffs on somebody who's trying to fight a war. We've done it to ourselves, whether it be in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. When you start limiting casualties because you're afraid of hurting anybody, war is a horrible thing. But if you don't prosecute it quickly, you will lose public support because it'll draw out forever. One of the things we've done with Ukraine that I really despise is we're slow-rolling support. Now, I know this splits the Republican Party. It unites the Democrats, but they really don't have any plan for success. They're like trickling it out, just like they always do, trickle this out. It's like another Vietnam, another Afghanistan. We only were successful in Iraq and Afghanistan when we had surge capabilities. And that's what the strongest, most powerful military of all time. We did not have success until we had surge ops. How do we expect the Ukrainians, with the third-ranked army, I'm the third world army, if you will, against a first world army, when they have 1/5 of the people, 1/20 of the economy? How are they supposed to compete unless we give them the weapons and the strategies, the available strategies to win this war? What they did to invade Russia, I thought was brilliant. I suggested that a year ago when I was in Ukraine. Because if you're going to win a war, you can't fight with artificial barriers, honing into one field of fire where the Russians are entrenched. It was a brilliant one. How did we win in Korea? Incheon, when we flanked the enemy by a brilliant move by MacArthur. That's what you do. You outmaneuver your enemies. Otherwise, you're in a stalemate with an enemy who has more people and more equipment, and you'll never win. Do we want to win or not? Because, quite frankly, I talked to the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and he said, this is absolutely a winnable war. We just have to have the right equipment. If you think about it, they took out half of Russia's armor and 350,000 casualties with just the little bit we gave them. Think about if we unleashed the hounds of hell against them. We have an economy of $27 trillion. Combine that with Europe and Japan and Australia, you're talking $50 trillion versus Russia's what, 2? We should be killing these guys. We should be outproducing them in energy, crippling their economy, sanctioning them, overwhelming them with weapon systems. This war would be over very quickly.
And I suppose then you hear about concerns of escalation. Should that tactic be used, and should that
war escalates? That's what you do. Clausewitzian warfare means you take the handcuffs off and you do it. Now, there are always people going to say, oh, we might start a nuclear. So what are you going to do? Give them Lithuania, Estonia, all the things he said he's going to take? We're just going to let him have it because he might get upset and he might press a button. If you're going to do that, you might just hand him Europe because we'll never stop him. This happened with World War II. Appeasement never works. Strength is what people understand, whether it be Iran, whether it be China, whether it be Russia, North Korea, name any bad guy out there. They understand strength. They do not understand when you come at them weak and piecemeal. And quite frankly, we should be going after Iran directly. Their weapon systems are being used against our allies and our own people, whether it be the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Russia. Iran is a real problem. Are we going to wait until they're a nuclear power before we do something?
If escalation occurs on either of those fronts, what does it mean for the United States ultimately then?
Ultimately, we need to solve this problem because we can't keep on kicking the can down the road. We can't keep on allowing bad guys to invade allied countries. We can't allow bad guys to come after Europe. The reason NATO was formed in the first place is the exact reason we are going to war right now, because we don't want a expansionist tyrannical government invading Europe. Reagan said it great at Point de Hoc 40 years ago. At D-Day's anniversary, he said, isolationism never was and never will be the answer to an expansionist tyrannical government. Did we have nuclear arms then? Of course we did. Did we do something anyways? Of course we did.
This is Rich McCormick joining us, 6th District of Georgia. He serves, representative of that state, that district. Let's hear from our first guest, our first call. This is from Maryland. Zame, Democrats line for our guests. Go ahead, you're on.
Good morning. 3 questions for you. The Republican-led election board has passed rules to muck up the counting and certification of the election in, I believe, it's 6 counties in Georgia. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I talked to Janelle King, who's one of the election board members. It is a recommendation. It does not take very long to count 300. Every precinct averages about 300 votes at the end of the night to count them out to make sure that the computer system matches the count in the bin. That way there's no second guessing if there's any added votes. It's pretty simple. How long does it take for several people to vote to count out 300 ballots? Not very long. And it's over within less than an hour, and then you have an exact count. Nobody has to worry.
You had two other questions, ma'am?
Yes, I believe there's more than 300
on average.
electors.
On average, per precinct.
Okay, all right. Okay, so now, IBF, how did you vote on that bill? Also, who won the 2020 presidential election?
Okay, thank you, caller.
Okay, IVF. I don't know why this is even an issue. I'm an ER doctor. How long has IVF been around? Decades now? I don't understand why this is even an issue. Why are we even handling it at the federal level? Just like abortion, this is a state level issue. People have stronger feelings on it, but most people don't even think about IVF unless you have a fertility problem. I think IVF is great. I think it's something that we need in order for some couples to have procreation. But why it became controversial this year just baffles me. I don't really have an opinion on IVF. That's up to you and your family, you and your doctor, you and your state. It shouldn't be a federal issue. Third, who won the election? Well, Biden's in the White House. We're on to the next election. Let's go.
Back to the caller's original point, it was all the state precincts will hand count ballots, but you're saying
by recommendation. So it's not binding. It's a recommendation by that
the state election board.
Yeah, that says we would like each precinct to count the number of votes to make sure it matches. So what happened is they had a person who got angry, wanted to take a picture of his voting card before he put it in the bin. That's not allowed. So he took his vote and walked out. So the number in the bin didn't match the number of votes on the machine. So those kind of things you don't want to have conspiracy theories on, but quite frankly, just making sure that the number of votes that's supposed to be in there is in there, and you just hand count them real quick, boom, 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 boom. It doesn't take very long. Whether you do it or not is a recommendation, but they recommend that you do a hand count just so it matches the machine count.
From David is in our independent line. David in Washington State in Vancouver. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. Good morning. My question is for Mr. McCormick. Wouldn't it be easier to take the money from the taxpayers and help other nations to do the right thing, peaceful things, instead of supplying Israel with the best military weapons? Even our country's armies don't have it. Wouldn't it be a lot easier to push for peace instead of wasting my money and other taxpayers' money on supplying weapons to Israel, which that state we created? And I grew up in a violent atmosphere in the old country there. And I'm so glad I left. And my point is, it's a lot easier to push for peace instead of supplying them with all the weapons they need to kill innocent lives. I witnessed one girl, 11 years old, got shot in the neck and died when I was growing up there. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad what our country is doing to those poor Palestinians. They didn't know where that came from. All this hatred since 1948.
Okay, I can answer your question if you'd like.
Let him finish. Are you done, caller?
Not yet.
Okay, we'll finish up, please.
Up to now, to do the right thing by them, and we choose not to.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
So everybody has an opinion on Israel. Everybody has an opinion on what the right thing is. Let's talk about what I just mentioned, peace through strength. I've never seen anything good happen in the Middle East by just laying down your arms. I wish it would, but I've seen the Shiites and the Sunnis fight each other. I've seen Iran and Iraq go at it since I was a little boy, quite frankly. I've seen unrest in that area since I was a little boy. I've never seen peace in that area. Now, obviously, Israel was established before I was there, but it's not just between Israel and everybody else. It's between those warring nations. There is a religious warfare that's been going on since the establishment of Islam. And I hate that they're having those problems there. I hate that innocent people get killed. I hate that it happens here in America. I have taken care of 9-year-olds who've been shot in the neck by their cousin and watched them bleed out as we're desperately trying to save them. I've done that. Nobody understands that and hates war more than I do. With that said, Israel was at peace. They didn't have anybody in Gaza. The border was relatively benign until on October 7th, a bunch of people crossed and started this most recent war. Now, if Israel decided to lay down all their arms, what do you think would happen? They would cease to be a country. They would be dominated and they'd be destroyed. You would have no more Jews there because they would be killed. Now, if the Palestinians laid down their arms, Hamas, there would be peace, quite frankly. The same thing goes with Hezbollah and the Houthis. This is all propped up by who? Who supplies arms that's used against innocents? On purpose, innocents, not just by collateral damage. It is Iran, a evil regime that has spread hate and discontent and kills innocents, including our own troops, by the weapons that they supply and their theology. They are a theocracy that absolutely abstains everything that America stands for. And if you don't stand up for them, they will continue to cause this hate and discontent, not just with us, not just with our allies, but with their own people. Look what they've done. They subjugate them to basically slavery.
Let's hear from Pennsylvania. Brian on our Republican line. Hi.
Good morning. I assume you have taken the Hippocratic Oath, sir?
I have.
Well, I find you as a hypocrite. And let me speak, and I wish you well, first off. I really do. There's a couple of things you referenced about Inchon and MacArthur and how we won the Korean War. I wanted to remind the congressman that we didn't win the Korean War. It was a stalemate, and today is a stalemate. And in the north side of Korea, there's an unreputable person that's running it now. I am a registered Republican, and I believe it's Republicans like you, sir, that really do divide the party. You're a warmonger, and yet you're a doctor. I find that to be a hypocritical way to live. Now, my main question is, I'd like to define what victory is in Ukraine. Okay, is it the rubble of Moscow? What is victory in Ukraine, or is it just a victory for the established, as Eisenhower used to reference, the industrial military complex? Again, I wish you well, and I'm rooting for Trump, but you're the kind of Republican that really irks me, sir. Really, really, it does.
Okay, Brian from Pennsylvania.
So, first of all, let me address a few things. I don't speak poorly about other Republicans. I'm not divisive. I don't speak poorly about anybody, really. I do talk about what I believe in. I'm not divisive because I'm not the one calling people names. When you talk about war, I've been in war zones. I've seen death. I've seen my friends die. Nobody wants war. I especially don't want war. I have 3 sons that are military age. You think I take that seriously? Do you think I want war? Do you think I want to see my sons die for something that doesn't matter? Of course not. Peace through strength. If you allow bad people to continue to advance, bad things happen. I grew up during the Reagan era. I watched what he did with Libya when Muammar Gaddafi was acting up. And what happened? Muammar Gaddafi all of a sudden became friendly. He all of a sudden, I don't want to have problems with the United States. Rolled over and showed his underside. His son died. Muammar Gaddafi's son died. We kowtowed that nation very quickly through strength. People understand strength. Weakness they also understand. It's because of the Biden policies, because of Obama's policies, that Ukraine was invaded in the first place. You notice it didn't happen while Trump was president. And we can disagree on Ukraine. But quite frankly, I want to save money. I want to save lives through strength. I don't want America involved in this war. That's why I want to give Ukraine the weapons to win this war. I don't want to see Europe continue to be invaded, as Putin has described. His verbiology basically supports what Peter the Great said. It's like straight out of what Catherine the Great said. It's the books on his shelf. I cannot secure my borders except for by expanding them. That's his philosophy. Nobody wants war, especially not me. When you talk about Incheon, that was a brilliant strategy. Without that, the Pusan perimeter collapse, we lose the war altogether. When I say we lose the war, we have nothing in Korea. So I actually used to teach this for a living, and I take great offense by you assuming anything about my intentions, because I don't assume anything about your intentions. And I think we can have diversity in our party. Diversity of thought, that's respectful dialogue. And to think that everybody has to think the same, that's the problem with the Republican Party.
He asked about victory in Ukraine, what it looks like. What would you say?
Well, if we give them, like I said, I talked to the Supreme Allied Commander. I've talked to the Secretary of Defense. I talked to Mike Pompeo. And when you talk about victory in Ukraine, it's pretty easy. You give them the weapons, you give them the sanctions against Russia, you outproduce them in energy. Russia's crippled. Very quickly, they'll sue for peace.
Back to the Georgia boards of elections. This is how USA Today described it. It's a controversial rule. It was passed. It said on Friday will require all the states' voting precincts to hand count ballots. So it sounds like it's a rule that's effective statewide.
It's not binding, though.
But if it's a rule that's statewide, how is it not binding?
It's a recommendation. That's my understanding. I talked to Janelle King, who's one of the members on the board. It's non-binding. It is a recommendation that wants them to hand count at the end of the night,
right,
per precinct.
But it doesn't slow the process down, or it doesn't as far
about
as
what, 45 minutes to know that the count is correct? Big deal. We're talking about how long has it been delayed in Georgia in the last several elections? Days, weeks? When I had my last election, I didn't know for sure for weeks. I'm talking about it has nothing to do with the hand count. It doesn't slow anything down. Are you kidding me? We have Democratic states that want to wait weeks for ballots to come in the mail, and you're worried about a hand count in Georgia for 45 minutes?
I'm not worried about it. It's the people of Georgia that are worried about it.
This is what I'm saying.
So
this isn't about delaying an election. We have all kinds of delays, but it's not going to be because of this.
Let's hear from Martin. Martin is in Kentucky, Democrats line for our guest, Rich McCormick of Georgia. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I want to talk about what the result would be if we get into a war with Iran. But before that, I want to mention that Israel having a strong military has never forced a peace agreement in the Middle East like the Republican Party has been telling us it would do since 1980. But if we get into a war with Iran to install a new government, now the country of Iraq is a much smaller country than Iran. When we decided their government had to go after the military battle was over, which didn't take very long, we did not get much resistance from the people in that country to install a new government because the Iraqi leader was a punishing dictator who punished his own people. But the country of Iran, contrary to what you just said a minute ago, sir, I have always thought since the 1979 revolution that they support their government, especially in their anti-American, anti-Israeli attitude. And if we get into a war with them, which I'm sure we would win, we could have an even bigger problem on our hands after it's over with. Like in the movie MacArthur, when they were talking about the atomic bomb, one guy said, well, what's going to happen if it doesn't work? And MacArthur said, I'm wondering what's going to happen if it does work. So I'd like to hear your response. Thank you.
First of all, I don't want to go to war with Iran, but I also don't want them to continue to supply our enemies with dangerous drones and missiles. If you remember what we did in Libya, we didn't go to war with them, but we punished them. They understand strength. Iran understands strength. If you want to talk about successes in the Middle East, I think President Trump should have won the Nobel Peace Prize because of the Abraham Accords. One of the most effective pieces of peace accords you've ever seen in that region ever. Nobody ever talks about that. That wasn't about war. That wasn't about anything other than getting people to understand each other, work together, benefit from each other through economics. Once you realize that people aren't bad, that we all want the same thing, we want to prosper. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I said about Gaza, you don't have to be recognized as a country to prosper. Look at Taiwan. Taiwan's one of the most wealthy countries in the world. It has TSMC, which is a great computer chip manufacturing company. They have that. They benefit from that. They're not a country. Work on your business. Get your ducks in a row. Get a good government that's not trying to go to war, but somebody who's actually trying to build an economy, and stop blaming other people for your failures, and you'll do a lot better.
Being on foreign affairs, what does foreign policy look like in another Trump administration or another Harris administration, depending on who wins?
I think, once again, peace through strength. It's how you project power. If you're willing to take out Qasem Soleimani, if you're willing to flex on people who are hurting American citizens and our allies abroad, I think people understand that when you're willing to use force to protect American lives, and you take that seriously, people are much more reserved about going actively after our allies and American citizens.
And your concerns if Vice President Harris wins?
Just the weakness continues. I think weakness equals war. Look at what's happening right now in Israel. Look at what China's doing to threaten Taiwan. Look at what's happening around the world. Look at what happened in Ukraine. Weakness equals war. That's been always the standard that's been maintained throughout world history. As a matter of fact, one of the things that scares me is that we have a massive arms buildup around the world right now. Look at how many people in Europe. I mean, great. Now they're carrying their portion of the NATO allyship. They're all trying to get 2% of their GDP in investment in their military. Some nations are way above that. Poland's way above that. Quite frankly, Saudi Arabia is way above that. Different countries are building up very quickly. China's building up very quickly. But we are at very precarious times. And if we don't have a projection of strength, we're in trouble.
From Shay in Baltimore, Republican line.
Yes, hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Listening to your guest, I just want to say, sir, you're very dishonest and you're very manipulative. It is people like you, the reason why American foreign policy or American soft power is at a very low level in this time of age. You were talking about peace through strength. I want to ask you a question. What would you do, or what would our American government do if China or Russia established a military base in Mexico and put a nuclear weapon there that threatens to shoot at us? What would you do? And that would be a strength on their end because they're projecting strength and power on their end to promote peace, as you were saying. But what would we do, we as an American, if they do that to us? And secondly, let's go back to Gaza. Does the Palestinians or Hamas, do they have a right to self-defense? Because as far as I'm concerned with international law, Hamas is a resistant force. Israel is an occupying force occupying the Palestinian land. Therefore, according to international law, Hamas has the legal, legitimate right to resist the Israeli occupation. And those are facts.
So let me ask you a question real quick. Let me ask you a question real quick. This is really important because you're saying things
Hold
that
on.
aren't
You're
really
talking
true.
and he's talking. So, caller, hold on. Guess what? Finish your thought, please.
Please. Because you were sitting here and giving all this BS lie that we've heard.
Okay, caller, if you're going to go down that route, we'll let the guest. Hold on. We'll let the guest respond.
So you said that Hamas
And he's gone by
is
the
a
way.
resistance because Israel was occupying. When October 7th happened, there was no occupation. It was Hamas that invaded Israel. There were no settlements. There haven't been for quite some time. The border was rather peaceful at that time. But somebody made a decision to invade Israel and start this most recent war. That's the fact. You're not admitting that. You're saying this is a resistance. Resistance of what? Israel was not in Gaza. So this is a very dishonest conversation to begin with, quite frankly.
If the House passes the legislation, the Senate passes as you go home for break, what happens when the House resumes work later on this year? What has to be resolved?
We have a ton to be resolved. Quite frankly, it'll depend on who has the Senate. I think the Republicans will. Who has the presidency, who has the House. We have a budget that has not been fixed in a very long time. We have a 30% deficit spending problem every year. When you're bringing in on $5.5 trillion, you're spending $7.5 trillion, 30%. Now, if 75% of your budget is non-discretionary, we don't even vote on it, and then another 15% is the military, which we're not going to reduce right now, we're arguing over 10% of the budget. If we cut 10% of the budget from that 10%, that's 1% of the budget, and we have a 30% deficit, we're in trouble. We are the world standard for economies. We're the world standard for currency. If we continue to have this debt grow faster than our GDP, we're not going to be the world standard of economy for very long, and that's going to put us in jeopardy for what we're going to try to achieve long term.
As it stands today, what's the likelihood that the House will remain in Republican hands after November?
If I was guessing, I would say about 70%.
Depending on what?
A lot of things. You got a lot of places in North Carolina. We're obviously going to lose a seat in Louisiana, Alabama, probably New York. But we're going to pick up some seats in North Carolina and some other places too. And I think we have a lot of disputed seats. We could pick up several. We could lose a few. But I think it's going to be very close either way.
Our guest serves the 6th District of Georgia, Representative Rich McCormick, a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks.